So this is the Aida fabric. It's spelled AIDA. I don't think anyone really knows how to pronounce it. I think officially it was named after the opera, so it would be Aida. But I think most people just go with Aida since that's how it's spelled. As we said in the previous video, it is made up of these squares that you're going to put one cross stitch in each square. Now, Aida fabric, when you buy it, you have to choose the count of fabric that you want. So you can choose from 11 count, 14, 16, 18, 20 count, possibly smaller than 20, but that would be getting very small. So the bigger the number, the higher the number of the Aida count, the smaller the squares on your cross stitch pattern. So it's in reverse. If you get 18 count Aida, you are going to be stitching on very small squares, which is going to be harder for a beginner. If you get 11 count Aida, you're going to be stitching on much larger squares. Over time, people develop personal preferences. 11 count can be a good place to start, but it is normally aimed for children. This is 14 count Aida. This is considered the standard. It's the Aida that is going to be available the most in most shops, and it is what you should start on as a beginner. I recommend that. My patterns all have sizes given for 14 count Aida, but I will explain how the sizes are calculated, and so you can calculate the size of Aida that you need for any count, any pattern. So the 14 count Aida means that there are 14 squares per inch. So this is why it goes in reverse to the number, because 16 count Aida has 16 squares per inch, and therefore they're smaller squares. So we get our ruler, see what this means. You just line it up with any line of holes in your fabric. Just pick this one at random and start counting the squares along it. So this is our 0 square here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I travel the inch, I've got 14 squares. So you can see that this is 14 count Aida. So if you were to find a random piece of Aida in your drawer, you can always work out yourself what the count is. So if we look at the pattern, then it tells you at the top the size of the pattern in stitches. So each stitch is going to cover one square of the Aida. So you've got 64 stitches or 64 squares across and 62 stitches vertically. So from the leftmost stitch here to the rightmost stitch here, that's going to be 64 stitches. This way it's going to be 62 stitches. I then include the number to show you how big that is in both inches and centimeters, but I'm going to show you how to work that out yourself so that you can calculate it if you did want to stitch this in a different count fabric, or if that information wasn't given to you on a pattern. So if we take our notepad and pen, write down the number of stitches, which is 64 here. Now the Aida count means that you have 14 stitches per inch if you're using 14 count fabric. So that means that we just need to divide our 64 by 14, which you can do in your head if you want, or you can get your calculator on. And we just divide 64 by 14, and that gives us 4.57 inches, which is what we had here. So the answer is always going to be in inches because Aida counts are in inches. If you want it in centimeters, go into Google, put in 4.57 inches in centimeters, and you'll get the number in centimeters. That's the easiest way to do it. So if we were using 16 count fabric, Then we would take 64, the width in stitches, and divide it by 16. Here we are, 64 divided by 16, and that's going to be exactly 4 inches wide. And if we take 18 count fabric, which is small squares, not suitable for a beginner, then just take 64 divided by 18 and you get 3.56 inches. So it really is that simple. There are online calculators for calculating the size of fabric, but you don't need them. You just take your phone calculator and you can immediately see the size of fabric you'll need. So we have here, if we go back, it's pre-calculated for the height as well. So our fabric for the design size is 4.6 inches, rounding it up, by 4.4 inches. So as I said before, this is the size of the pattern. If you have fabric that is exactly this size, your pattern is going to come right to the edge. It's going to be ruined. You need a margin. You need a margin to fit it in a hoop. You need the margin to fit it in a frame. And you need to make sure your fabric is big enough and that you have centered your pattern correctly, which we will do in the next video. Otherwise, you're in danger of working away, putting all this effort into producing your lovely piece, and then you'll just fall off the end of the fabric and you'll be very, very sad. So we need to add on the border. So I normally say add 2 to 3 inches around. For a large pattern, I'd add 3 inches more. For a small pattern, 2 inches is fine if you're going to frame it. So this is a small pattern, so let's say 2 inches. Now remember, that is 2 inches all the way round. 2 inches on the left of the pattern, on the right, on the top and on the bottom. I just showed you, gestured the margin on the pattern. I realised I forgot to say in the previous video that something to notice is that the pattern is not the same size as your stitch piece. And you see that the squares on our pattern are much bigger than the squares on the stitch piece. Some people are confused by that. They think, oh, here's my pattern, here's my fabric, this is how big it's going to be. It's not. They have no connection. The size of the pattern, this is much bigger than it's going to be when you've stitched it. It's designed to be bigger so that you can easily read the symbols. So don't look at your pattern and think this is the size it's going to be. It's a guide, and it's that big so that you can read it easily. So we're going to add 2 inches margin all the way round. So because you need 2 inches on both sides, that means you're adding 4 inches. So that means that our fabric size is 8.6 inches times 8.8 inches. So about 9 inches square. You aren't going to buy fabric that's exactly the right size. You obviously need to find fabric that's bigger and then cut it, like with this one. So you'll just buy a piece of Aida fabric that's bigger than that and you can cut it down. But there is a but. Because we're going to stitch this in the hoop and frame it in the hoop, if you're going to stitch this by in hand, just holding the fabric in your hand and stitching, which is absolutely fine, then you can use the 9 inches square fabric. Because we're going to use the hoop in these videos, this is a 6-inch hoop. 6 inches is the diameter of the hoop, like that. You need to make sure that the fabric is going to fit in your hoop, irrelevant of the size of the pattern. You could have a tiny pattern this big that you've decided to frame in a larger hoop for some reason. You'd still need to allow the margin of fabric to fit into the hoop. So this becomes a bit less relevant because you're really calculating from the size of the hoop, so long as you know you've got your hoop size correctly. So we can see from this calculation that if our pattern's 4.6 inches across, it's going to fit nicely in the hoop. So for this, it's a 6-inch hoop, and I would give 2 inches again on either side of the hoop to make sure that you've got ample margin. So that is going to mean, because we've got 2 inches on each side of 6 inches, that we're going to need 10 inches by 10 inches fabric. So we are now ready to cut our fabric.